They were kind of goth.
These people feel socially awkward and rejected by society.
They just wanted to get away.
The vehicle they were in was not large enough to accommodate them all.
They needed something bigger.
The Lillylit family had a van, had a lot of room in it.
And this meeting changed all these lives forever.
This was such an outrageous crime.
There was a line crossed that day.
Sometimes there's evil in the world.
At the end of the day, on April 6, 1997, Mark Gabby, an independent contractor, is driving on a country road near Baileyton, Tennessee. Suddenly, he hears a gunshot. Then a few seconds later, silence is broken by the sound of new gunfire. This time, he's sure he heard two distinct weapons firing. In the following minutes, a resident of Halloween Lane calls the Greene County Sheriff's Office to lodge a complaint about excessive noise. As he is patrolling in the area, Sergeant Frank Waddell heads for the scene. He inspects the perimeter, but doesn't notice anything unusual. However, as he is climbing back in his patrol car, his headlights reveal vague silhouettes in the ditch. He is stunned by the monstrous scene lying before him. A family of four, both parents and two young children, lying in a pool of blood.
When that officer discovered that, of course, he dispatched that, asked for an ambulance, and told what he had, and they had been shot, so I knew right then that I needed to get there.
Both of the parents were found dead when emergency responders arrived.
The children are still breathing.
The little girl was unconscious, but still alive. The 2-year-old boy appeared to be unconscious, but reportedly when medical technicians attempted to pick him up, he cried. He reacted as they tried to take him from his mother's body.
They are the Lillylit family from Knoxville, Tennessee. Father Vidar is 34 years old, Mother Delphina 29, Tabitha, their daughter, is 6, and their son Peter, 2.
The Lillylit family was shot repeatedly.
The parents are dead, and the children barely surviving.
The 6-year-old girl was pronounced dead about noon the next day at the hospital where she had been taken.
Young Peter will survive his wounds to the chest and eye. He will remain blind in one eye and disabled.
He finally was released from medical care in the U.S., and he was taken to live with his aunt and uncle who adopted him.
What Mark Gabby originally mistook for simple child's play will reveal to be, in reality, a cruel and murderous act. A group of 6 young people, ages 14 to 20, are the authors of this abominable murder.
There were 6 suspects in the case. They were all from a rural part of eastern Kentucky. At the time, they ranged in age from 20, being the oldest, to 14, being the youngest.
They had stopped at a rest area on Interstate 81 with a very precise goal: leaving behind their miserable lives in their godforsaken village, Pikeville, Kentucky, forever. Pikeville is the seat of Pike County. With its population of 6,905, it is the 4th largest city in Kentucky. Known for its annual Hillbilly Day Festival, a typical Appalachian cultural celebration which focuses on the stereotype of the uneducated local bumpkin, the hillbilly. Pikeville and its annual festival will not manage to entice and hold this group of 6 runaways any longer. Their leader is Natasha Cornett, 18.
I think that Natasha Cornett's background was one very hopeless.
Natasha Cornett was born in an underprivileged part of rural Kentucky.
Natasha was born January the 26th, 1979 in Pikeville Hospital here.
She came from a pretty tough childhood.
As a baby, Natasha suffers from a congenital heart defect, for which she will have to undergo an operation at the age of 16 months.
Her father was Roger Burgess. I was married to Edward Wallen at the time.
Their union is doomed from the start, and Madonna finds solace in the comforting arms of another man, Roger Burgess, a local policeman, and Natasha's biological father.
When I found out I was pregnant, Roger denied it too.
The Wallens' marriage quickly deteriorates. Madonna is now a single mother living in a mobile home on the outskirts of Pikeville on Pike Floyd Hollow. Natasha doesn't feel loved.
She thought Ed was her father. And then when she'd start school, I told her because I knew everybody else knew it. And I was afraid some of the kids would say something to her about it. So I sat her down and I told her as much as I could.
It isn't like he wasn't in her environment. She knew him, for he lived in the same town. He just refused to acknowledge her, increasing her abandonment and rejection issues.
It just sort of, I think, broke something in her right then.
Natasha is an abused child.
It was of the nature of having a very difficult relationship with her mother, a lot of verbal and emotional abuse from her mother that she described, even some physical altercations with her mother.
It is clear that victims of physical and incestuous abuse accumulate much anger and deception, especially when it comes from people who are close to us. The child no longer trusts authority or society, and although the desire for revenge is unconscious, it remains alive.
In the context of these family hardships, it's not surprising that Natasha became a marginal teen.
After that, it was really hard for me and Natasha.
Because of her goth appearance and her strange behavior, her classmates find her weird and call her a freak. In 7th grade, Natasha loses quite a bit of weight in a very short time.
She's lost 30 pounds in 1 month. She quit eating. And I took her to the doctor there at Betsy Lane, and he just looked at me. He said, "She's beyond my expertise." Said I'm gonna have to send her to Lexington.
While there, Natasha consults with a specialist in eating disorders who suspects that her patient may be suffering from bipolar disorder. She suggests a stay in a mental institution, but Natasha is reluctant to do so.
We went down there on the pretext of just checking it out, and I told Natasha that she was going to have to stay. And she started just bawling and just crying her eyes out. Valena started crying. I thought, oh, I'm the meanest mommy in the whole world, but I've got to do it. I've got to do it. I've got to save her. She hated me. She hated me, and she still hates me over that.
Unfortunately, her mother's medical insurance only covers 11 days of hospitalization.
The doctors told me that she's not well. She needs more time, but said we can't help it because you don't have any insurance. So I had to bring her home in that condition to see a psychiatrist here. That was Mountain Calm. And nobody here even knew how to even take the first step in helping her.
Because treatment for her condition is very expensive, Natasha doesn't take her medication as often as prescribed, and her bipolarity worsens.
She said, Mom, I can't take it. Said, I can't stand it. They prescribed 2 different kinds for her. And she said it made her worse than what she was already. One doctor, I guess, that really told the truth about it, he told me, he said, Madonna, she said she needs to be in a structured environment.
This teenager didn't have structure, nothing to identify with, no limits. That's when it can get dangerous.
When her grades start falling dramatically, Natasha gives up and drops out. She becomes more and more interested in the goth subculture and starts to associate with teens with the same interests.
She seems to be extremely disappointed in reality, disappointed in society, disappointed in her family. These people often take parallel roads. They can try to shock or to provoke. It's not surprising that they become marginalized and give out the impression that they're nurturing an evil core.
Despite her eating disorders and bipolarity, Natasha abuses alcohol and drugs. Marijuana, LSD, PCP, ecstasy. It just makes her even more rebellious. And as if that wasn't enough, she starts, along with her turbulent gang, to dabble in occultism.
She loved the tarot cards. I mean, it was just, she was telling everybody's fortune, you know, even her own. And she liked the Ouija board, too.
They're totally disconnected from reality. They're in a reality that's parallel to the one that's full of suffering and rejection. So it's not surprising that these marginalized individuals can relate to that.
Natasha's occult activities seem excessive. Could this be due to malnutrition, drugs, alcohol, or her severe untreated bipolar condition? At 17, Natasha decides to make a fresh start. She marries her longtime friend, Stephen Cornett.
The wedding was, I guess, what you call God. The wedding was just really, really, really short.
Unfortunately, the marriage will only last 6 months.
Steve left her. He brought her down to the house to get her some clothes, and he left her there. And she never saw him again.
Stay here! Hey! No! Don't leave me! No!
Following her separation, Natasha goes back to her goth lifestyle and her group of friends, all from dysfunctional families.
They included Joe Reisner, Crystal Sturgill, Dean Mullins, Karen Howell, and Jason Bryant.
And so they all ended up basically in high school together, hanging as a group. If one did one thing, they all did one thing. They would come together and protect each other.
The members of the group, made up of teens and young adults, are used to living with rejection and physical, sexual, or psychological abuse.
It was a bleak and troubling description of backgrounds across the spectrum for all 6 of them.
Besides having to deal with their goth identities, the Forsaken teens have engaged in the path of occultism, Satanism, vampirism, and self-mutilation.
There are allegations that there was, that they drank each other's blood and that sort of thing.
The self-mutilation and the cutting and then capturing the blood from one person or another and then drinking the blood, that was all, according to Natasha, intended to bring more power to these demons, which she could then use to do things.
I absolutely, without any doubt whatsoever, believe each and every one of them was involved in Satanism.
Natasha is convinced that she's the devil's daughter.
Natasha, spelled backwards, is Satan, A-H-S-A-T-A-N. So Natasha had adopted that as her, claim to fame. My name spelled backwards is Satan. And she wrote that down a lot on different things.
There was a place there, I called it the tunnel, that we found that was there with many Satanistic symbols on there, including one that said, hell is for children. And it was signed by Satan, Natasha.
The fact that her name written backwards is Satan has precise meaning for her. She attributes all of her bottled-up rage to Satan.
Since living in Pikeville seems an absolute hell to them, the teens decide to make a new life for themselves by leaving their God-forsaken town. Destination, New Orleans.
There was this attraction of New Orleans, something about, I guess, the way that people were, the way they dressed, it was just, she liked it.
It's not before April 6, 1997, that they finally put their plan into action. Before leaving Kentucky, Karen, with $500 she has stolen from her father, treats the group to the local McDonald's. The crew is also armed with 2 guns. The first one has been stolen from Karen's dad by Jason Bryant, who swiped it in his gun locker. The second one comes from a friend of Mullen's. And why guns? Because the kids deem the small Chevrolet Citation, stolen from Joe Reisner's mother, is too cramped to get all 6 of them to Louisiana.
Natasha and all the others were in a small Chevrolet Citation that belonged to Joe Reisner's mother.
The vehicle they were in was not large enough to accommodate them all.
And it was as cramped as it could be. If there were only 4 people in the car, it would have been cramped, especially on a trip to New Orleans. They needed something bigger.
Their plan consists in carjacking a bigger vehicle by threatening the owner with their guns.
The 6 kids from eastern Kentucky were driving down 81.
And they headed actually toward Knoxville, which is the hometown of the Lillylid family.
They stopped at a rest stop there on 81, just on the east side of Greenville.
By chance, a perfect, roomy minivan is also parked there. Their plan to steal a car is put into action.
There was a conversation that they wanted to get the van between Joe Reisner and Natasha.
And a very quick plan was formulated to steal the van.
The young family who owns the minivan exits the restrooms. Vidar and Delphina Lillylid, with their 2 young children, are heading to Knoxville, Tennessee.
The Lillylid family, young parents, late 20s, early 30s, with 2 small children, a 2-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl, were returning home to a suburb of Knoxville.
They had just come from a religious convention of Jehovah's Witnesses.
And they chose to stop at the same rest area as the 6 young people from Kentucky.
The happy family had stopped to have a bite and to stretch their legs before tackling the last stretch of road towards home.
The mother was in the bathroom with the little girl. And Natasha and Karen was making up the girl because she was so cute.
Some of the kids may have been dressed in sort of black or what people refer to as goth. And the Lillylid family approached them and were talking to them about religion.
They were Jehovah's Witness. That was their religion, and their religion was to try to witness to people and give them the word. And they approached them, and they, meaning Natasha and Joe, they pretended to be interested.
They didn't want to take the van right there in the rest area where people came and went regularly and lots of people around.
Joseph Reisner pulled a weapon, 9mm, and threatened Vidar Lillylid and said, "We just want your van."
We're going to take your van and we're going to take you away from here.
Nobody will get hurt if you cooperate with us. We just want your van.
The family was forced into the van along with a couple of the kids, and then the other kids followed the van in the car that they had been in.
Crystal and Dean was in Joe's car. Karen and Joe, Tosh, and Jason was in the van with the Lily Lids.
With Joe Reisner's weapon trained on him, Vidar takes the wheel. Jason Bryant, armed with his .25 caliber gun, sits in the middle of the back seat with Karen Howell, Natasha Cornett, and little Peter Lillylid, sitting in his booster seat. Delphina and her younger daughter are wedged in the back of the vehicle, and Tabitha starts crying.
The people were really scared, and the babies were crying, and Natasha said that the mother started singing, you know, to the babies, and Jason got really mad and told them to shut up.
The Lillylids beg the kids to free them and promise never to reveal their identities. Unfortunately, their pleas will fall on deaf ears.
They took the Lillylid family down to a very small place, off-road.
Everybody gets out from the vehicle, and the little family is ordered to line up next to the ditch. According to Natasha and the 4 other members of the group, it's Jason who points his weapon at the Lillylids, obviously intending to kill them.
They told a lot of their friends that they were going to be leaving, that they should look for them on the national news. They even told some of their friends, we're going to kill someone.
Natasha said, Mommy, I did everything I could.
Natasha then places herself between Jason and the Lillylids and warns him that she will move only if he promises to spare the children. Jason finally agrees. Natasha takes his word for it and takes 2 steps to the side.
Jason said he wouldn't shoot the children. He shot right through the children, right through the children to the mother and dad.
Despite losing consciousness after being hit the first time, Vidar will be shot point blank 5 times. He dies in less than 3 minutes. Delphina, hit by 8 bullets, will take almost 20 minutes to die. As a matter of fact, she is still conscious when her children are dragged on the ground and laid on Vidar and her to form a cross.
The daughter's body was laid across the father in the form of a cross. Peter Lillylid's body, who was still alive, was laid across his mother in the form of a cross.
Upon leaving, the driver of the minivan will run over Vidar and Delphina's legs while she is still conscious. Despite their serious injuries, the children are still alive. Tabitha will die the following day at the medical center of the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. Peter will manage to pull through.
Peter Lillylid, the younger son, survived the shooting.
He was shot in the head, blind in one eye, had some brain damage, some motor skill damage, but did survive and is being raised by relatives.
And that we ask now that your prayers be made for my nephew Peter, who's all that we have left of my sister's family.
The Lillylid family was killed for their car.
Their reasoning was simple. They needed a car. It wasn't absolutely necessary to kill people for it, and they did not have to kill them the way they did.
Even today, the identity of the real murderer of the Lillylid family is disputed. However, even if their fingers never pulled the trigger, it's obvious that they are all complicit in the massacre.
Their presence and their part of the group made them complicit in the crime.
The family was murdered, and the 6 kids then took off with the van. They left that car at the scene of the murder.
It showed up as registered to Joseph Reisner's mother, so we called her from the scene, and she told us that her son had left in her car without her permission.
Because of their negligence, the police authorities will manage to locate them fairly easily.
And it was a poorly conceived plan. They were never going to be able to get away with stealing the van.
These people do not consider the difficulty or complexity of finding a vehicle. They simply believe that they will find a car, take it, find money. They believe in wishful thinking and flight forward.
Some of the items that were left in their Kentucky vehicle identified one or more of them, and so they would have been found very quickly.
In the late afternoon of April 6, 1997, the 6 young people leave Halloween Lane in the Lily Lid minivan and head south on Interstate 81. However, because of the abominable murder they have just committed, they decide to change destinations. Thinking it'll be safer to leave the country, they head to Mexico.
The kids left in the van, and then they went into Mexico. But they had failed to obtain an insurance card, which is required in Mexico if you're driving there. And so they were stopped by the Mexican authorities and forced to leave the country.
Shortly after this massacre, Sergeant Frank Waddell of Greene County Sheriff's Office answers a call from his dispatcher asking him to check out a routine complaint about excessive noise around Halloween Lane.
The group felt that the road they were on was isolated, but they were actually, it was dark, but they were actually right within 100 feet or so of a house that was sitting up on a hill. And those people in that house heard the shots, a succession of shots, a delay, and then some more shots. They called the sheriff's department and reported that they had heard the shots and that there was a vehicle left there at the scene with its headlights on. So our officers responded.
Nothing could have prepared Agent Waddell for the scene he discovers.
With headlights shown in the ditch line and showed the bodies of the adult victims, and then the children were laying on the chest of the victims.
Vidar and Delfina, both shot several times, are dead.
We noticed tire impressions across the legs of the adult victims, right up in the upper thigh, knee and upper thigh area.
The children are miraculously still alive, and Sergeant Waddell immediately calls for an ambulance so they can be urgently transported to the hospital.
The 6 suspects were arrested at the U.S.-Mexico border in the town of Douglas, Arizona.
There had been a bulletin issued for the vehicle, the van, that had been stolen from the Lilids.
During routine check of the license plate on the van, which was the Lily Lid van, which they were then driving, it had been registered as being taken in a multiple murder, and they were stopped. They were taken into custody there.
So I left immediately from Kentucky. The next morning I was on a plane to Arizona.
All 6 ultimately waived extradition.
They were flown in by the Marshal Service and landed at Knoxville. And we sent separate cars to take each one of them to Greenville.
And that's where they were prosecuted.
In a little town like Greenville, they're very, very religious. And when those kids came to Greenville, Greenville was ready for them.
This was such an outrageous crime. The public outcry was huge.
People began to shout and jeer at the suspects, calling them baby killers.
I think they believed that they were, people of the devil, the general population.
People were so angry about what they had done.
I knew this was going to be a big deal.
But before the trial, there's the investigation. 5 members of the group accuse Jason Bryant of pulling the trigger, but he accuses Reisner and Mullins of committing this atrocious murder.
Joseph Reisner did admit to swerving the van to run over the bodies, so he did admit to that. There's no reason to believe he didn't do the shooting, some of the shooting.
Joe never had a criminal record. He was known as a good fella.
I'd be very surprised if my client, Dean Mullins, pulled the trigger to kill any person.
At 14, he would be tried in juvenile court, so Bryant is the ideal scapegoat.
As a juvenile offender, he would not be subject to the death penalty or to as severe a sentence.
Even if the identity of the actual killer isn't known, all 6 of the accused are considered equally responsible.
And in the state of Tennessee, of course, if you participate in a crime, and the crime was the stealing of a van, that's a felony theft, and then someone's killed during the commission of that crime, then you're equally guilty as if you had killed the person yourself, felony murder.
They even kept souvenirs of the event.
They thought they took it for the souvenir of killing.
Either in remembrance of or to be used in future rituals that they might have, you know, to bring in their belief more power to the group, Natasha's belief anyway.
Before the group's arrest in Arizona, policemen from Pikeville, Kentucky have been investigating to find the authors of this crime. They then learn that the 6 suspects have been involved in a satanic ritual on the eve of their mortal expedition. Traces from the ritual lead the investigators to the Kali Motel.
The Kali Motel was a place the kids could go locally. They didn't ask a lot of questions. They took cash for the room, and kids could go there and be alone.
The clerk couldn't suspect the type of activities taking place in that room.
Natasha and Karen started cutting themselves. They were cutters.
And there was blood in the floor, and there was burns in the carpet where they had tried to burn, apparently 666 in the carpet.
She said it wasn't a satanic ritual or anything like that, but she said there was a lot of blood in the bathroom, I guess.
The girls wound up cutting the boys, and they bled, and the boys really weren't into it, except for Jason Bryant.
What little bit we know about what happened there, it may have been satanic, it may not have been.
The trial of the Lillylid family's murderers is off to a rough start.
After they're extradited and brought back to Tennessee and to Greene County, then they start the process in the lower courts, juvenile court for the juveniles, general sessions court for the adults.
The arraignment of the 4 adult suspects, Cornett, Sturgill, Reisner, and Mullins, takes place on April 15, 1997. Judge James Carter refuses bail and submits 3 charges of murder in the first degree. Appointed by the court to defend Natasha Cornett, lawyer Eric Kahn accepts the mandate, but it soon becomes known that he's doing so for personal reasons.
Natasha was lost to begin with Eric bringing all these documentaries that, you know, they had before she even went to trial just about it. It was just, oh, it was awful. It really was.
She believes that in the year 2000, a millennial type argument, that in the year 2000, everyone on Earth will already be dead because Armageddon has already started a few months ago.
He was, you know, sensational. He said, you know, things about satanic worship and cultism.
It was all about she was the devil's daughter, and the devil was going to, you know, get her out of jail, and he was going to help. This is the stuff that he told her to say, and he was going to plead her insane then.
He hurt Natasha's case, I believe. I would say that.
A history of
This selfish quest for popularity undergone by Eric Kahn leads to his revocation and delays the preliminary hearing to May 21st. So Natasha has the time to find a new lawyer to defend her.
Mr. Cupp and Mr. Street, they took over the case then and were there, you know, through the whole thing.
Meanwhile, Jason Bryant and Karen Howell are finally extradited to Tennessee, where their hearing is scheduled for July. This hearing seeks to determine if they will be tried as adults or before juvenile court.
They started in juvenile court. The juvenile court found that they should be tried as an adult.
Miss Howe and Mr. Bryant were both tried as adults in Tennessee, and the death penalty was sought for both of them.
In the end, there were 6 people being tried as adults.
During that trial, the issue was not guilt or innocence, of course. It was whether or not the punishment should be life with possibility of parole or life without the possibility of parole.
Attorney General Berkeley Bell is convinced this crime has been committed for satanic motives.
I remember the District Attorney, Berkeley Bell, making mention that sometimes there's evil in the world.
It puzzles me for anybody to be afraid of Natasha and to think that she's an evil person. The prosecuting attorney said she was the most evil person that he had ever met. And I thought, well, he hasn't met very many people then.
What these 6 suspects were accused of doing and what he was convinced, in fact, they did do and they were convicted of doing, could only be evil.
He truly believes that the members of the Lilly-Lid family have been offered as a sacrifice by 6 disciples of Satan.
There are aspects of the case that have satanic elements, but I don't think it was a satanic killing or any of that sort of thing.
On September 9th, 1997, the 6 suspects plead not guilty to the charges of murder. However, on February 20th, 1998, they changed their minds and decide to plead guilty to avoid the death penalty.
They were facing the death penalty.
They made it this plea bargaining thing.
Either all of them accepting life without parole and therefore escaping the death penalty, or all going to trial.
I'm totally convinced that had we gone to trial, the 4 adults would have been given the death penalty.
They made them lie. I mean, you're not supposed to lie when you're in court. So why did they make those kids lie?
If I felt like I wasn't guilty, I wouldn't plead guilty.
All 5 of the accused will point to Jason Bryant as the sole culprit in the shooting.
I believe that some of the kids did, in fact, blame the murder on Jason Bryant.
There was difference in guilt of each one. Jason was the killer, though.
He denied it. He said he didn't shoot anyone.
I don't think it was ever determined who actually pulled the trigger. Almost had to be from the facts more than one person.
Nobody admitted to being the second shooter, so it's anybody's guess as to really who may have taken a turn.
Many experts will testify during the trial, including Dr. Paul Geringer, a psychologist charged with evaluating Jason Bryant.
A psychologist wrote that he was a rather dependent individual who lacked initiative.
Well, it was pretty obvious that Natasha Cornett was the main leader.
She made a lot of the decisions about where to go and what to do and what motel room to get and what they were going to do that night and gathering people together and that sort of thing.
She would have been the Charles Manson of that particular group, able to control people to the point that they would actually kill for her.
Another expert, Dr. Cleland Blake, a forensic pathologist, will estimate that the pattern of the bullets, arranged in perfect equilateral triangles on the bodies, confirms the satanic nature of the murders.
The medical examiner measured the points between the triangles and they were at equal distance.
I mean, it was almost to the 1/8 of a degree.
I couldn't explain if I had to how you could do that on 2 different bodies and have those patterns be so perfect.
And if you go into a computer and you put them together, it forms a pentagram.
At the end of the trial, in March of 1998, Judge James E. Beckner will find each of the 6 accused guilty of murder in the 1st degree and attempted murder. and will sentence them all to life in prison without possibility of parole.
When we were given the opportunity to plead guilty in exchange for the state removing the death penalty as an option for sentencing, we knew what the outcome would be.
The adults and the juveniles received a sentence of life without the possibility of parole times 3 for each victim, and then 40 years for the aggravated attempted murder of Peter Lillet, who survived. So they all got an equal sentence. They'll all be in prison for the rest of their life.
In addition, for each charge, they will receive additional sentences of 25 years for kidnapping with a weapon, 12 years for kidnapping, and 4 years for theft.
The judge ran those sentences consecutively. So it's a large number of years that they would have to do, and of course it's well beyond anybody's life expectancy. So they will spend the rest of their life in prison, all of them.
I said that, compared it to an adoption, I said that each of them had adopted the crime as their own and given it their name. And I believe that to be the case.
Today, Cornett, Howell, Sturgill, Reisner, Mullins, and Bryant are all detained in the correctional facilities of the state of Tennessee.
You know, run away and it'll all go away. I think that's the way she thought it would happen. She sure didn't think it was going to happen the way it did.
There was a line crossed that day, a line between life and death for the Lillets, and a line between a life of freedom or a life of jail time for the defendants that were charged.
Prisoners of a childhood marred with abuse and incest, 6 young people will enjoy a fleeting moment of glory by committing a monstrous murder. As a result, the virtual prison that was their existence in Kentucky will lead them to live the entirety of their adult lives behind the actual steel bars of a Tennessee jail.
I mean, it's awful to say that your child has to go to prison before they can have a life.
Make sure you equip children with strong decision-making skills and a value of life.
I believe they were all entranced by Satan, and it was good and bad on the side of the road that night.
I thought it was, and I still do think that it was the only sentence that should be imposed for the crimes they committed.
That was probably, I think, the best outcome for them. I know a lot of people don't agree, but maybe the death penalty was too good for them.